This is the sixth presentation given at the 2024 National Gun Conference, and this is by Senator Bridget McKenzie on the topic, What Shooters Can Do to Improve Their Outlook. I'd like to welcome Senator Bridget McKenzie, who's here today. So I've got you on mute at the moment, and her timing is impeccable because she's actually got the next presentation. So good afternoon, Bridget. How are you?
Great to be with you. Can you hear me,
Sure,
everybody? Excellent. Thank you. I'm down in Hamilton in Western Victoria at an event called Sheepvention, which is obviously a convention about sheep, but it's a pretty awesome day, big field day.
What I'll do,
yes.
so I'll just introduce your title. So Senator McKenzie's title is presentation is What Shooters Can Do to Improve Their Outlook, and I'm just going to just introduce you. So Bridget is the Shadow Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development and the leader of the Nationals in the Senate. She's a former Cabinet Minister and the first federal female Agriculture Minister, and has held a number of portfolios including emergency management, national recovery and resilience, sport, regional communications, education and health. Bridget was elected as Senator for Victoria in 2010, and she holds a Bachelor for Applied Science and Education, specialising in mathematics and physical education, and has lectured at Monash University. And she's the author of a biography of former Country Party Prime Minister John McEwen, Right Man, Right Place, Right Time, and you're quite a shooter yourself. So thank you for joining us, and the floor's yours.
Thanks, Neil. Great to be with you all, and I just want to congratulate you for organising something that I think all of us in all of our different spaces and places have been waiting for, and that's to get one united kind of conversation, shall we say, in this federated space and place that favours law-abiding firearm owners and what we need to do. You know, what we like to do has economic benefits, has social benefits, has environmental benefits. And I don't think we should ever stop promoting that as part of what each of us does in our own space. A big shout out to my former boss, Nigel Scullion. Good to see you, Nige, and former colleague, David Linehelm. Lovely to see you. Long time no see. I guess the way I can probably contribute best to this conversation is just to give you a little bit of my experience over the last 14 years in Parliament. Things that have worked, things that haven't worked, because I know you've been hearing from a raft of guest speakers who are much better and much more experienced than I am in their field of endeavour, so including probably shooting, but I do enjoy it. And I might say when I did Kitchen Cabinet, now a lot of you won't watch the ABC, but Kitchen Cabinet is an ABC show where Annabelle Crabb gets pollies and does amazing things with them. With Nigel, they took him mud crabbing, and when she rang me up, she said, Bridget, I really want to go shooting. I really want to do shooting with you. And I said, well, Annabelle, I don't think the ABC audience is ready for deer hunting and venison backstrap carpaccio as the dish du jour on Kitchen Cabinet. And to her credit, she laughed. She is a country girl, and she said, no, we can't do Bambi, but can we do clays? And to her credit, she couldn't wait. She loved it. And if I'm at the airport, at Sheepvention, in the shopping centre, and people, that's the most recognised thing. They remember me shooting with Annabelle Crabb, who they love. So it is about taking those moments in all of our professional lives to demystify hunting and shooting, to normalise hunting and shooting, and to normalise hunters and shooters in the eyes of the broader Australian public. Yes, we have, there's a militancy, there's a political arm, etc., that has to be employed. But that social licence to be militant, to be political, also has to come with a legitimacy. And that legitimacy in a democracy like ours comes from people accepting that you have a right and a privilege to do what we want to do. And so I think part of that is normalising and demystifying. And I've tried to take that mindset into everything I've done or tried to do in my political career around firearm ownership and furthering our cause. Because once we lose that, it then becomes very easy, if you're the demonised, it becomes very easy for political forces to separate you from Joe Citizen, from the broader body politic, and therefore you're abnormal, and we can do things to that group over there that we would never do to this group over here. And so that's why I want to keep us as part of the mainstream as much as possible. And that's why Penny winning a bronze, Olympics are great for us because they are part of that broader Australian narrative. One of the things I was able to do in Parliament was to set up the Parliamentary Friends of Shooters, a bipartisan group, and David was a member of that group when he was in the Senate, as was Nige, and it continues to this day. So Rapaccioli, Dan Rapaccioli is my co-chair. He's obviously a sporting pistol shooter, and that is a great way for media to understand who we are, because we have an annual police shoot against the media. They come out to a clay range, they meet us all, they have a go, they realise it's not as crazy as they thought it was, and shooters are actually quite normal people. And so the next time they're asked to do a story about a shooting or, you know, something particularly from the left-wing part of our country, they have a better lens on which to analyse the data and to speak to the community. And so that's been a really powerful piece, and I've noticed a change in the media out of Canberra reporting on firearms and firearm owners over the decade. So I would be recommending to anyone, and I don't have a view, an understanding of who's on the Zoom, but if you're involved in state politics, my ideal would be that we would have a Parliamentary Friends of Shooters in every single state and territory, and that we would have a convention or a biannual convention similar to what they do in the US with the Sportsman's Caucus, which becomes a caucus where we share intelligence and understanding, not just about the activity itself, but legislation across state and federal spheres that can impact our ability to do that. So just an example, when I was Minister for Regional Communications in the last government, Australia Post decided they weren't going to allow certain businesses to post packages of certain sizes and dimensions, which meant that Australian shooters wouldn't be able to actually receive their firearms or their ammunition via Australia Post, and FedEx had refused to do it as well. So we actually had a situation where you were asking people, say from WA or the Territory or Queensland, to drive 7 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours to their nearest capital city to pick it up. So being able to find those pieces of legislation, call the CEO in, do the round table, set up the conversation with business and actually affect change that way. That only comes when you've got MPs from all sides of politics and in all levels of government who are prepared to share the information and who are plugged into stakeholders who are going to go, hey, Bridget, I only knew about that because, you know, farmers from WA got really aggro about it and called me and said, you know, this is going to be an animal husbandry issue for me because I can't actually have the ammo and the firearms I need to actually care for my livestock in a way that's humane. And then obviously all those other flow-on impacts. So I would like to see something like that set up. I've also been asked to speak about how I think we can move things forward. And I think WA has got some really draconian legislation in front of it at the moment at a state level. And unfortunately, both the major parties are backing it. It's only the National Party and minor parties in WA who are saying no to those changes. And that tells me we've got a way to go in normalising the conversation about what law-abiding firearm owners need to do our thing. So we've got to fight against that. And I noticed someone said, "Oh, we don't want to be political." Sorry, I'm over that. That is, I won't use all the adjectives I was going to use. You know, life is political. Every single decision you make that, you know, that someone doesn't agree with is a political decision. And you've assessed the cost-benefit analysis of that before you make the decision, before you articulate that publicly. We need to be braver, more courageous, more secure in who we are and our genuine need to exist. You can't be celebrating women with gold medals around their necks and the very next minute stopping the clubhouses where that next generation of athlete is grown in every little country town around the country operating. You don't grow Olympic athletes once they turn 18. There's no sport that does that. So there's a whole kind of cascading impact of decisions that seem inconsequential over here that result in significant impacts here. So times of the Olympics, I think, are times that as an industry, I'll call us an industry, I don't know what we're going to call it, a community, that whether you're into it or not, you're going to have to start celebrating it and normalising it, because that's the in. It's the in to young people, it's the in to funding, it's the in to legitimising, and it's the in to women. It's the in to women. Now, I don't know how long, I'm a senator, so I can go for 20 minutes without a breath, but if you'd like to go to questions, I'm really happy to. It's often the best way to get the most out of a conversation.
Okay, so again, I'm just trying to organise a couple of things. Okay, if anybody's got any questions or comments to the Senator's speech, then feel free.
I'm always good for a comment or a question, Neil. Interesting, you mentioned a caucus, Bridget. Neil and David put this together, and obviously we as Shooters Union came out quickly in supporting a concept of a national conference. And Tom from SSAA's been speaking about exactly this same kind. I don't know whether you saw some of the material we spoke about earlier, but it's funny, there's a common thread here. We're all speaking the same language. Is something like a national conference that we're starting now that we hope to build into being a venue-based conference, perhaps at the back end of a gun show in Brisbane or
Shot
Melbourne?
show. I was just going to say it'd be perfect at the front or the end or during a shot show. Absolutely.
Correct. And so that's what you were referring to as something like that.
Well, yeah. So
this is what we're hoping to build toward.
I suspect.
No, sorry, I was going to say this is what we're hoping to build towards.
Yeah, David, I cannot say that enough. Like getting CIFA started was critical. Instead of competing against each other, those lads had to come together, and getting them in a room and saying, I'm from government, I'm a shooter. You can't all come to me separately. You need to get together. And they formulated, and that has been a critical underpinning, I think, for a lot of the work we do. I will just put it out there, like I have always been bedeviled about the fact that I will go into a country town and there'll be a ACA target range, there'll be a field and game target range, there'll be a SSAA target range, an old mate who doesn't get along with any of those other men, he'll have his own off the record out in the back paddock. Like, there is something unique about shooting that someone has a fight with someone in the 1970s and goes and sets up the same thing just down the road. That's got to end. And you don't want that culture. That's probably the culture that's kept everyone separated over a long time. And that's allowed them to pick us off. So I think coming together despite differences, and that's why I think the idea of a caucus is better, because it's not a political party per se. And it is finding political situations and talking about a political construct and political solutions without a singular ideology.
Tom, Bridget, I should just introduce myself. Hello, I'm Tom Kenyon. I'm
Hi,
a former
Tom.
state member of Parliament in South Australia, and now for 2.5 weeks now the CEO of SSAA. So really just to say hello. I very much enjoyed your talk just now, and that what you just said about coming together as, you know, with one message at least, if not one group, is a very good news. Well, it's a good message to be giving to the firearms industry more generally.
And I think it's super possible, right? We're well resourced. We're just got to not let the fact that there's a lot of chiefs get in way of the actual message, which is to legitimise, because the social licence is being taken away. You know, firearm owners shop, you know, you can't get finance. They'll be stopping you being able to open new clubs. Hunting is getting more and more restricted. You know, in my own home state, and I hate to say this, but if it wasn't for certain heavies in the Labor Party, we'd be unable to have a duck season. So, I mean, this is the reality that we have to deal with. So getting mums and dads and kids on board, talking about organically, sustainably harvested protein, and sporting clubs, just like your netball club is what your local shooting club should be, I think. And obviously having the backroom muscle then to do the heavy hitting when you need to have it done. I think that's a good model. But a caucus that is cross parliaments, I think would be really, really powerful, because the legislation that binds a lot of the issues is at a state level, not at a Commonwealth level.
Well, I'm sure that one of your former colleagues might have something to say.
So one of the issues that that I found very disheartening when I was in the Senate with Bridget was how difficult it was to get the consultative committee up and running. Even at the federal level, hearing the government needed to hear from shooters. It needed to hear from the dealers and those trying to import firearm parts and ammunition and firearms themselves. But also there were a multitude of issues, from appearances to categorizations of firearms and all the sorts of things that you're familiar with. And yet I found it extremely frustrating that under the Abbott Turnbull government, during the time when I was in the Senate, we basically didn't get the consultative committee up and functioning at all. And one of the and that was despite the fact that, at least for part of the time, the relevant minister was in the Senate, in Linda Reynolds. So I found that quite discouraging. And I don't think, I mean, you know, I try not to be pessimistic about this, but it certainly doesn't encourage anybody to think that we're making any progress when, even at, you know, a basic talking to government level, it doesn't happen. Any thoughts on that, Bridget?
Yeah, David, thank you. My understanding is the consultative committee did get up and going, because I sat down with the minister and said, you can't have that group, you've got to have that group. And we actually had, rather than people, had organisations being a part of that. The problem was, as I understood it, was that it wasn't solidified appropriately, and so dissolved. That it doesn't exist now. So it just completely dissolved. I was of the understanding that it was set up. Field and Game were on it, SSAA was on it, SIFA was on it, the dealers were on it.
So my understanding was that it was eventually set up, but it met about twice and it achieved sod all. So, you know, we might both be right, but...
well, we might both be right, which can also be true.
But I mean, I guess the hope would be that a consultative committee like that might be listened to, taken notice of, and there was no evidence that that was ever the case.
Well, and I think you're right, David. It has to be permanent, not something that a given minister can, at their whim, decide to listen to, hold meetings sometimes. And as I recall, it was people were being sent down rabbit holes on who were making the decisions around things that weren't actually the case. So a proper structure around having a consultative committee to whoever that minister happens to be, and it's usually an assistant minister in the Home Affairs portfolio. I think that's something that this group, outside of me, but hopefully we're in government, can implement it, is actually part of a policy platform that a caucus would put to, as Nigel was saying, all sides of politics and saying, we want a permanent consultative committee at a federal level. We want, like, what are the high order principles that we can all agree on that don't get into a level of granularity that mean we all disintegrate, but that there's 2 or 3 things that are non-negotiables. Would be, I think, you've got a federal election coming up. You'll have a WA election next year. You've got a Queensland election very, very shortly. But whether there's something that a caucus could sort of agree on. Because at a bare minimum, consultative committees should exist. And the minister should have to meet with X amount of times. It should be a formulated process of feedback and input.
I quite agree. Yeah.
Could I just speak to the success we've had in Queensland, Bridget? This may not be the perfect solution, but
yeah,
for many years we had police ministers up here that were, let's just go suboptimal. Mark Ryan came along.
Oh yeah.
And Mark is on the sort of the left end of the spectrum. He's a lawyer, so he sort of gets law. I knew him personally as he was a patron of a pistol club that I was a member of for a period of time. So I got to meet him through that experience. And when he became police minister, the first thing we did was fire in and go, come on, we want some proper consultation. To his credit, and, we could pick on him for a lot of things, but to his credit, he has been consultative, not listening as much, or maybe the police don't listen as much as they should. But we do have a forum and we do meet reasonably regularly 2 to 3 times a year. And this has been going on for a few years. So it certainly works. And apart from anything else, it also gets us and the Dealers Association and SSAA and a few other interest groups. We're all in the same room.
That's right.
If they're telling porky pies, we all get to hear it, and then we can all go away and, combat it for the next meeting. So I would encourage other states, and look, we're starting to do it a bit in New South Wales. I know SSAA in some states are stronger than others. Certainly up here, they're very active alongside us. Certainly in South Australia, we've got some good representation going on down there, and obviously Tom's from South Australia, so I'm hoping that maybe some of the other states can actually learn from what we've been doing up here. We'd like to make it more productive, of course, but I think you've got to get everybody at the table and make sure that it is an ongoing thing. So whether we get another, what's his name, Stephen Miles-led government, Lord help us, in the future, or we get a LNP, KAP, crossbench balance of power type government, which would be excellent. We want to keep that process going with the next minister, and I think that suggestion is something that we could all take away into every other state jurisdiction.
It reinforces Bridget's point that this needs to be entrenched, embedded, I can't remember the word she used. The point is, of course, that with the change of minister in Queensland, you might lose all of that. And that's the risk. And that was certainly the situation in the federal arena when ministers were coming and going. You know, the committee would start to get established, and then a minister would change, and then the committee would disappear. It needs to be embedded in the system so that it's not subject to changes in personnel.
Yeah, well, to that end, I mean, we're obviously working on the potential other minister, the future minister, if he becomes it, so that does continue. So yes, you've got to work with both sides of politics. And, you know, I'm pretty apolitical. You know, if Mark Ryan came out and said, we're going to adopt a whole new raft of laws and regulations that Shooters Union are really, really happy with, I'd be saying vote one, Mark Ryan.
Yeah.
I don't care what party you're from. This is
Correct.
a bit more. This is a more single issue matter, which I think we've all spoken to today. Anyway, I should be quiet for a bit.
All right. I think on that score, we'll call this one to an end. Now,